The 4 a.m. air in the kitchen was stale, thick with the scent of old coffee grounds and the low, incessant hum of the refrigerator. My body ached, a deep, grinding exhaustion that had settled into my bones over weeks, maybe months. From the back bedroom, a low mumble. Maria. She'd been up all night, wandering, talking to ghosts only she could see. I had managed maybe 2 hours of sleep, broken into useless 20-minute chunks. I needed coffee. Real coffee, strong enough to strip paint. I fumbled for the light switch over the counter, squinting as the single fluorescent bulb flickered to life, painting the cluttered room in a harsh chemical white. My gaze fell to the drying rack next to the sink. I reached for my father's mug. It was my one morning ritual, the one solid thing in a day of shifting sands. A heavy, dark teal ceramic mug from some pottery guild in Vermont, a gift from years ago. The glaze was thick. The handle fit my hand perfectly. It had a heft to it, a sense of permanence. My fingers closed on empty air. I blinked, my sleep-deprived brain struggling to catch up. I scanned the rack again. Plates, a few bowls, silverware. No teal mug. My hand moved on its own, drifting to the side, and touched something else. A mug, yes, but not my mug. This one was a pale, sky blue. The ceramic was thin, light, and felt cheap. I picked it up. It was an industrial, mass-produced thing, the kind you'd find in a diner. Near the handle, a tiny black hairline crack snaked its way down an inch. I was certain I'd never seen it before. A frown creased my forehead. CPU's running slow, I muttered to the empty room. My own voice sounded rough. I must have left Dad's mug in her room last night. Maybe when I brought her water. It made sense. I was tired. I made mistakes. I held the cheap blue mug under the tap. The water hit its bottom with a thin, tinny sound, not the solid thud I was used to. I spooned coffee into the filter, the small actions mechanical, wrote. I stood there, leaning against the counter, listening to the machine hiss and gurgle, the cheap blue mug held loosely in my hand. It didn't feel right. The weight was wrong. The balance was off. After I helped Maria with her morning pills, a cocktail of colors and shapes designed to keep the worst of the fog at bay, I walked back into the kitchen. The coffee was done, its bitter aroma now filling the space. And I stopped dead in the doorway. On the dead center of the small wooden kitchen table sat my father's mug, the dark teal one. It was positioned perfectly, handle facing the door, as if presented for inspection. It was completely, utterly dry. I walked to it slowly, my heart starting a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I ran a finger inside. Not a drop of moisture, no lingering warmth. It hadn't been used. It hadn't been washed. The cheap, sky blue mug was gone. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged alertness. No, that couldn't be. I had just held it. I had washed it. I looked at my own hands, half expecting them to be wet. They were dry. Okay, Alex, I whispered. Okay. I started to move. Methodically. I opened the trash can, the plastic liner crinkling under my probing fingers. Nothing but coffee grounds, and an empty milk carton. I crouched, peering under the table, dust bunnies, and shadows. I went to the sink, my hands plunging into the cold, greasy water from last night's dishes, feeling for the shape of a mug. I felt a plate, a fork, the smooth, slimy surface of left-behind food. No mug. I pulled the plug, the water draining with a sick gurgle. The sink was empty. It was never there. The thought came, unbidden and stark. It was simply never there. I had imagined it. A hallucination brought on by a critical lack of sleep. That had to be it. My mind was playing tricks, fraying at the edges. I was losing it. The stress of Maria's condition, the isolation, the relentless grinding routine. It was finally cracking me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the counter. It was a good explanation. It was a rational explanation. But the fine hairs on my arms were standing on end, and a cold spot had formed in the pit of my stomach. Alex! Her voice from the bedroom. It wasn't the usual muddled, questioning call. It was clear, precise. A single, sharp word. It cut through the hum of the refrigerator. I pushed off the counter and walked quickly down the short hall, the floorboards creaking under my weight. She was sitting up in her bed, which was unusual for this time of morning. Her thin gray hair was askew, but her eyes were fixed on me. They were lucid. The cloudy confusion I saw every day was gone. In its place was a flat, knowing stare. Her frail hand lifted, a bony finger pointing not at me, but past me, towards the old, dark wood wardrobe against the opposite wall. My father's wardrobe. I hadn't opened it in years. "Your father's mug," she said, her voice a perfectly normal, conversational tone that was more terrifying than any scream. "It's in there." My blood ran cold. "What? Mom, no, the mug is on the—" "In there," she repeated, her gaze unwavering, her fingers still pointing. A tremor started in my hand. I walked toward the wardrobe as if wading through deep water. The air grew heavy, static. I could smell the faint scent of mothballs and old wool. My fingers found the cold, tarnished brass knob. It felt icy to the touch. I hesitated for a second, a primal part of my brain screaming at me to turn around, to walk out of the room, out of the house, and to just keep walking, but I couldn't. I was her son, her caretaker. I was tethered to this place, to her. I pulled the door open. It didn't creak. It swung open silently on well-oiled hinges I had never oiled. And I saw them. My mind refused to process it at first. It was not clothes. Not my father's old suits or boxes of memories. It was a solid, floor-to-ceiling wall of pale blue. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Cheap, sky-blue mugs. Each one identical to the one I thought I'd imagined. Each with the same tiny hairline crack near the handle. They were stacked with an impossible, geometric precision, forming a dense, silent mosaic that filled the entire space. The weak morning light from the window caught the cheap glaze on a few of them, creating a constellation of dull, vacant highlights. A strangled noise escaped my throat. I slammed the door shut. The sound was a loud, definitive bang in the quiet room. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized me. This was not fatigue. This was not a dream. This was happening. Shit. Oh God, oh shit! I gasped, backing away, my eyes wide, fixed on the wardrobe door as if it might burst open. I had to get out. I had to call someone. My sister. I had to call Kate. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I pulled it out. The screen was black. Dead. I jabbed the power button. Nothing. I held it down, my thumb pressing hard into the glass. The screen remained lifeless, a dark mirror reflecting my own terrified face, but that wasn't possible. I'd charged it last night. I remembered plugging it in. I remembered seeing the green battery icon at a full 100% before I went to bed. I was trapped. A sound. From inside the wardrobe. It was a low, dry scrape, the sound of ceramic on ceramic. A chittering, clinking noise, as if the mugs were shifting, settling. As if something was moving among them. Stirring. My body acted on its own. Animal instinct took over. I lunged for Maria's bed. It was heavy, solid oak, but adrenaline gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I shoved it, the legs screaming in protest against the wooden floor, until the headboard slammed against the wardrobe doors with a solid thud. I grabbed Maria's thin, bird-like arm. She was surprisingly pliant, her eyes still locked on the wardrobe. "Come on," I hissed, pulling her out of the bed, dragging her towards the ensuite bathroom. Her bare feet scuffed on the floor. I shoved us both inside the small, tiled space and slammed the door. My shaking hand found the lock on the knob and turned it. The bolt shot home with a loud, metallic click. I pushed her into the corner, behind the shower curtain, and pressed a hand over her mouth. "Shh! Be quiet. Please, just be quiet." My back was pressed against the cold wooden door. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic pounding of my own heart. The house fell silent again. No scraping. No clinking. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge from the kitchen, a sound that now seemed sinister. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Did I imagine the sound too? Was this all in my head? The mugs, the phone, the noise? The thought was a brief, desperate lifeline of sanity. Then I heard it. From the other side of the bathroom door. A sound so small, so quiet, it was almost imperceptible. A soft click. The brass doorknob on my side of the door began to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. It turned a quarter of the way, paused, and then turned back. Someone, something, had just tried the door. We waited. I don't know for how long. I was frozen, my back cemented to the door, my hand clamped over my mother's mouth. The only sounds were the blood roaring in my ears and her muffled, panicked breaths against my palm. After what felt like hours, the silence outside remained unbroken. Slowly, carefully, I lowered myself, my muscles screaming in protest. I put my eye to the narrow crack between the bottom of the door and the worn linoleum floor. I could see a sliver of the hallway carpet. It was empty. The weak light filtering from the living room showed no shadows, no movement, nothing. A long, ragged breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs in a shudder. I felt a wave of dizziness. I leaned my head back against the wood, my eyes closed. It was gone. Whatever it was gone for now. I turned back to my mother. She was standing there, staring at me. Her eyes were still terribly lucid, islands of clarity in a sea of dementia, and she was holding something. From the folds of her thin cotton nightgown, she produced a single sky blue mug. It was one of them, the cheap ceramic, the hairline crack near the handle. She must have taken it. Sometime between me seeing them and pulling her from the bed, she had taken one. She held it out to me in her trembling hand, a peace offering. An explanation. Her lips parted, and she spoke in a low whisper, a conspiratorial hiss that was not her own. "Drink, son," she said, her eyes wide and earnest. "It made this for you." The ceramic felt cold and smooth against my mother's skin. The blue of the mug was a hateful color. Her voice was not hers. It was a clear, calm thing, a guest in her throat. "Drink, son. It made this for you." My hand shot out, not to take it, but to knock it away. The mug flew from her grip, hit the tiled wall with a sharp crack that was louder than a gunshot in the small space, and shattered on the floor. Pale blue fragments skittered into the corners. Maria flinched, a small, choked sound escaping her. The lucid moment in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cloud of familiar fear and confusion. She looked at the pieces on the floor, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't wait. I unlocked the bathroom door and pulled it open, checking the hallway. It was empty. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled her by the arm, back into her bedroom. I didn't look at the wardrobe. I didn't want to know if the sound of the mug breaking had caused any more settling. I guided her back to the bed, pulled the covers over her thin frame. She curled into a ball, shaking. My own hands were trembling. The adrenaline was leaving me, replaced by a deep, vibrating chill. I needed an anchor. Something real. Something from before. Before the mugs, before Maria's mind began to unravel, before the house itself felt like it was holding its breath. Memory. I needed to hold on to a memory. I left her room, walking into the living room. The morning light was gray and thin, filtered through the dirty windows. Dust motes swam in the beams. Against the far wall was a bookshelf, sagging under the weight of old paperbacks and my father's technical manuals. On the bottom shelf was what I was looking for, a stack of photo albums. I pulled one out. It was heavy, the faux leather cover cracked at the spine. The title on a small brass plate read, "Family Vacations, 1995 to 2002. I carried it to the coffee table and sat on the threadbare couch, the springs groaning in protest. I needed this. I needed to see our faces. I needed to see proof of a reality that made sense. "Just tired," I muttered to the quiet room. The sound of my own voice was a small comfort. "Too much stress. That's all. It's just stress." I opened the album. The plastic pages were yellowed, the film of adhesive beneath them having lost its stickiness years ago. The first few pages were from a trip to the Grand Canyon. I barely remembered it. Then, Disney World. Me, a gap-toothed kid with a ridiculous goofy hat. I kept turning the pages, the soft rustle of the plastic a soothing sound. I was looking for one photo in particular, my favorite. I found it near the end of the album. There we were, the three of us on a beach. My father, tall and tanned, had his arm around my mother. He was laughing, his head thrown back, eyes crinkled at the corners. My mother was smiling too, a real, genuine smile, not the tired, vacant expression she wore now. And me, a skinny kid of about 10, standing between them, grinning so wide it looked like my face would split. I remembered the day perfectly, the sting of salt in the air, the hot sand under my feet, The way my father's laughter boomed over the sound of the waves. It was a good day. It was a real day. I carefully worked the photograph from under the plastic film. The paper was thick, glossy. I turned it over. On the back, in my mother's neat, looping handwriting, were the words, Myrtle Beach, 1999. I frowned. My fingers tightened on the edge of the photo. No, that wasn't right. I remembered. I remembered the long drive. The specific hotel, with the leaky ice machine, the boardwalk arcade where I spent all my allowance. It wasn't Myrtle Beach. It was Virginia Beach. And it wasn't 1999. It was 2001. I was 12, not 10. I was sure of it. A cold trickle of unease ran down my spine, but I pushed it away. It was her memory, not mine. She was already getting confused back then, mixing up dates and places. Her condition hadn't come on overnight. It had been a long, slow erosion. This was just a sign of it, an early one. Her faulty memory had bled onto the back of a photograph. It had to be. I stood up, the photo held tight in my hand. I would put it in a frame, put it on my desk, a reminder of what was real even if the details were a little smudged. I found an old wooden frame in a drawer and placed the picture inside. I set it on the corner of my cluttered desk in the spare room. It looked good. The three of us, happy, real. Several hours passed. I threw myself into chores. I did the dishes, scrubbed the kitchen floor, changed Maria's sheets while she slept. The mundane physical labor was a balm. My mind quieted. The wardrobe full of mugs began to feel like a nightmare I was slowly waking from. The mislabeled photograph was just a sad footnote in my mother's decline. I was just tired. Everything could be explained. I was wiping dust from the bookshelf when I glanced towards my desk. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, striking the new frame. My hand froze in midair, the dusty rag hanging limply from my fingers. Something was wrong. My heart gave a hard, painful thud against my ribs. I walked slowly towards the desk, my shoes silent on the worn carpet. I leaned in, my face close to the glass of the frame. In the photograph, my father was no longer laughing. His arm was still around my mother. His body was still angled in the same way. But his face was a mask. His mouth was a flat, neutral line. His eyes, which had been crinkled in laughter, were now open and staring directly forward, straight at the camera. Devoid of any expression at all, it was a blank, observant look. My mother was still smiling. I was still grinning. But my father was a statue. A stranger. What the fuck? I whispered. The words came out as a puff of air. This wasn't a faulty memory. This was a physical change. I snatched the frame from the desk, my fingers fumbling with the metal tabs on the back. I pulled the photograph out. The glossy surface felt slick with sweat from my hand. I held it up to the light. It was undeniable. His face was wrong. I scrambled back to the coffee table, grabbing the album. I flipped through the pages, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I compared the beach photo to the others. Grand Canyon trip? Dad was smiling. Disney World? He was laughing, holding my hand. In every single other photograph, he was the man I remembered. Only this one. Only the one I had taken out. Rationality was gone. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a hallucination. Something was actively, malevolently changing things. It was rewriting my past. I needed proof. The original. The negative. My father had been a meticulous amateur photographer. He kept everything. I bolted from the living room, heading for the hall closet we used for storage. It was packed with boxes, old winter coats, a vacuum cleaner that hadn't worked in a decade. I clawed my way to the back, searching for a specific set of containers. I found them on the top shelf, behind a stack of board games, a set of gray plastic tubs labeled by year. I pulled down the one marked 9802. I carried it back into the weak light of the hall, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I pried the lid off. Inside were dozens of small, plastic canisters, each with a paper sleeve indicating the roll of film within. I dug through them, my fingers clumsy. I found it. A canister labeled VA Beach Trip 01. My own handwriting from when I was a kid. A wave of relief, so sharp it was painful, washed over me. Here it was, the proof. No, wait. My handwriting said VA Beach 01, but the canister felt light. I shook it. There was no familiar rattle of a film roll inside. There was only a soft, shifting sound, like sand. My blood ran cold. With a trembling hand, I pulled the black plastic cap off the canister. I tipped it over my palm. It was not a roll of film. Fine, pale sand cascaded onto my hand. followed by 3 tiny broken pieces of seashell. The sand was cool and damp. A smell hit me then. Not the dry, dusty smell of the closet. It was the thick, briny smell of low tide. The wet, organic smell of the ocean. It was coming from the canister. It was coming from the sand in my hand. At that exact moment, the television in the living room turned on. The sound was sudden and loud in the quiet house. It was the voice of a man, deep and resonant, the kind you hear on nature documentaries. I dropped the canister. It clattered on the hardwood floor, spilling the rest of its impossible contents. I walked like a sleepwalker back to the living room doorway and stared. On the screen was a beach. A wide expanse of pale sand, with gentle waves rolling in under a clear blue sky. It was him, the narrator. Myrtle Beach, the voice on the TV said, calm and authoritative, is one of the most popular tourist destinations on the East Coast. Its shores have seen generations of families create memories. The camera panned slowly across the beach. It was the beach from the photograph. I recognized the shape of the pier in the far distance. But memory is a fragile thing, the narrator continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. It can be eroded, like the shore before the waves. What we think we remember and what truly was can become 2 very different things. It knows. The thought was a blade of ice in my mind. It was not random. It knew I had the photo. It knew I was looking for the negative. It was watching me. It was toying with me. I felt a scream building in my chest, a raw, animal sound of pure terror, but it died in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. My eyes darted to my mother's room. The door was ajar. I could see her. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, straight-backed, facing the living room, facing the television. She wasn't confused. She wasn't asleep. She was watching the documentary. Watching it with a placid, focused attention, as if it was the most interesting thing in the world. Rage, hot and sharp, cut through the fear. A blind, desperate fury. I lunged into the living room and grabbed the television's power cord, yanking it from the wall socket with all my strength. The screen went black. The narrator's voice was silenced. But the sound of the ocean did not stop. It grew louder. The gentle wash of waves became a steady, crashing roar. It wasn't coming from the TV anymore. It was coming from everywhere. From the walls. From the floor. The entire house vibrated with the sound of a phantom ocean. I looked down at my feet. The carpet was dark. It was wet. Water, clear and salty, was seeping out from under the baseboards, soaking into the old fabric of the floor. The salty smell was overpowering. I was drowning on dry land. My eyes fell on the desk. On the broken photograph I'd left there, I snatched it up. The piece of paper felt slick, flimsy. This was the source. This was the wound. In a surge of pure, unthinking panic, I turned and threw it as hard as I could. Not at the wall with the TV, but at the opposite wall, the one that separated the living room from my mother's bedroom. The photograph, just a piece of paper, hit the wall with the sound of a rock. There was a loud, splintering crack. A web of fissures spread out from the point of impact, not on the paper, but on the plaster of the wall itself. And then, silence. The roaring of the waves stopped. The vibration ceased. The house was quiet again. I stood panting in the middle of the room, my chest heaving. I looked down. The carpet was dry. The water was gone. The salty smell had vanished, replaced by the familiar scent of dust and old furniture. I took a shaky step towards the wall where I had thrown the photo. It lay on the floor amidst a small shower of plaster dust. I knelt down, my knees cracking. I reached out a trembling hand and picked it up. The paper was torn across the middle. I held the 2 halves together. I looked at my father's face. It was still blank, a void in the middle of a happy memory. I looked at my mother's face. Her smile was gone too. She now had the same vacant, expressionless stare as her husband. 2 strangers on a beach I no longer knew. Only one person was left smiling. The small, skinny boy caught between them. Me. Grinning a huge, idiotic, joyful grin, utterly alone in a world that had just gone dead. The 2 torn halves of the photograph felt like nothing in my hand. Weightless. Just paper. I knelt on the floor amid the fine white powder of the plaster, my own breathing loud in my ears. I looked from the blank face of the man in the photo to the placid, smiling face of the woman, and then to the grinning fool of a boy caught between them. Me, the last one left in a memory that was eating itself alive. My knees ached. I pushed myself up, using the wall for support. The torn picture fell from my numb fingers. I left it there. It was garbage now, it was poison. I needed to do something. Something normal. A task. A simple, physical task to stop the shaking in my hands. In the corner of the living room, gathering dust on a low-end table, was my father's old Panasonic radio. A big silver and black thing with a telescoping antenna and a dial that clicked when you turned it. He'd loved that radio. Listened to baseball games on it every summer evening. Maybe some music would help. Cut through this awful quiet. Make the house feel like a house again. I picked it up. It was heavy. Solid. I carried it to the kitchen counter and set it down. I pushed the power button. Nothing. Of course. The batteries had probably been dead for a decade. I flipped it over. The battery cover was held on by a small Phillips screw. I spent 5 minutes searching through the junk drawer, my fingers rummaging past old rubber bands, dried-up pens, and loose paper clips before I found a small screwdriver. The screw was stiff, but it gave with a groan. I slid the plastic cover off. The compartment was empty, the metal contacts inside filmed with a faint patina of corrosion. It took 2 D-cells. I didn't have any. I searched the pantry, the laundry room closets, under the sink. Nothing. No batteries. A hot, stupid frustration rose in my chest. I couldn't even do this one simple thing. I couldn't even make music play. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the useless screwdriver in my hand, staring at the dead radio on the counter. A voice spoke. It was low, rumbling, with a familiar warmth that made every nerve in my body go tight. It came from the radio. "Let me fix that for you, son." The screwdriver slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. I stared at the radio. It sat there, inert, unplugged, no batteries. My heart was a fist hammering against my ribs. No, I didn't hear that. I was tired. Beyond tired. My brain was throwing sparks, pulling sounds out of the air. It was a memory. The words he'd said 1,000 times when I was a kid, fumbling with a broken toy or a bicycle chain. That's all it was. A memory so strong it felt real. I bent down, my hand trembling slightly as I picked up the screwdriver. I set it on the counter. I would not think about it. I would not give it power. I abandoned the radio. I turned on the tap and filled a glass with water, drinking it down in long, fast gulps. The water was cold. It felt real. Then I heard it. A soft, absent-minded humming. It was a tune I hadn't heard in years. A simple, looping melody from some old folk song I could no longer name. But I knew the humming. It was the sound my father made every morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror with his shaving cream and razor. The sound was coming from the hallway. From the bathroom. I put the glass down so hard on the counter it nearly cracked. This was not a memory. This was not grief. The humming was clear, consistent. And Maria didn't know that song. She'd never known it. Okay, this isn't normal. The thought was cold and sharp. The thin wall of denial I built around myself crumbled to dust. I looked around the kitchen, my eyes frantic. My gaze landed on the fireplace tools by the back door. I pulled the heavy iron poker from its stand. The weight of it in my hand was a small, cold comfort. It was something solid in a world that was turning to smoke. I moved out of the kitchen, my bare feet making no sound on the floor. I hugged the wall of the hallway, the iron poker held tight in my fist. Each hum from the bathroom was a physical poke, a deliberate, mocking touch. It knew. It was playing with me, using my own history against me. The humming continued, steady and calm, as I crept closer. I reached the bathroom door, which was slightly ajar. I could see the edge of the sink, the corner of the medicine cabinet. I tensed, ready to push the door open. The humming stopped. For a second, there was only the sound of my own blood in my ears. Then, a new sound started. A cough. A single, wet, rattling cough that echoed from the tiled room. It was a sound I knew better than my own name. It was the sound that had filled this house for the last 2 years of my father's life. The sound of his lungs giving up. Another cough. This one harder, a desperate, tearing sound. It went on and on, a choking, liquid-filled paroxysm of agony. It was the sound of a man drowning from the inside out. It grew louder, seeming to fill not just the bathroom but the entire house, vibrating through the floorboards, shaking the very air. And then the phone rang. The old landline on the hall table shrilled. A piercing, ugly noise that cut through the coughing. A second later, my cell phone, sitting on the living room coffee table, began to ring with its own tinny, jarring tone. Both at once. The coughing from the bathroom didn't stop. It was a chorus of torment. I stumbled back from the bathroom door, dropping the poker. It hit the hardwood with a loud clang. I lurched to the hall table and snatched the receiver of the landline. The coughing was still roaring in my ears, but I could hear a sound on the line. A weak, strained whisper. "Alex, help me." It was his voice. The voice from the radio, but broken now. Small, afraid. "No," I whispered. My throat felt like it was full of sand. "It hurts, son. Please." "You're dead." The words tore out of me in a raw shout. "You're dead. What are you?" I threw the receiver against the wall. It shattered, a spider web of cracks appearing in the yellowed plastic. I ran into the living room, grabbed my still-ringing cell phone and screamed into it. "Leave me alone!" I hurled it at the far wall, where the television was. It hit with a plastic crack and fell silent. The violent coughing from the bathroom stopped. The house was quiet again, a deep, profound quiet that felt heavier than any sound. The bathroom door swung open. Maria stood in the doorway. She was wearing her pale blue nightgown. Her feet were bare. Her face was slack, her eyes unfocused. But it was her body that was wrong. It was jerking in small, unnatural spasms. Her shoulders hitched. Her jaw worked. And then the sound started again, coming from her throat. It was the cough. His cough. Her small frame convulsed with the force of it, a dry, racking heave that didn't match her body. It was a sound too big, too ragged for her. She took a stumbling step towards me. Her hands came up, not to clutch her own chest but reaching for me. Her eyes were empty, but her body was a puppet, animated by that terrible familiar sound of suffering. She took another step, her body twisting. The cough came again, a desperate gasp for air that wasn't hers. The sight broke something inside me. All fear, all grief, all confusion erupted in a single, clean burst of rage. This thing was wearing my mother's skin. It was desecrating my father's memory. It was turning my home into a theater for its own amusement. "You are not my mother," I snarled. The words were low and full of venom. She was 3 feet away now, her hand outstretched. As her body convulsed with another phantom cough, I lunged forward. My palms hit her collarbones. It was a hard shove. Harder than I intended. She was so frail, so light. She flew backwards as if she had no weight at all. There was no time for her to cry out. Her body hit the hardwood floor of the hallway. The sound was a dull thud, followed by a lighter crack as her head hit the wood. And the coughing stopped. Instantly. She lay there, a small, crumpled heap in a blue nightgown. She didn't move. "Mom?" The rage vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a wave of cold horror. "Oh, God, Mom!" I scrambled to her side, my knees hitting the floor hard. I turned her gently. Her eyes were closed. There was a dark spot beginning to form on the floorboards beneath her head. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck, fumbling for a pulse. My own heart was pounding so hard I could barely feel anything else. There. A pulse. Faint. Thready. But it was there. She was breathing. Shallow, but breathing. I was on my knees, staring down at her, my mind a blank wall of static, when a sound made me freeze. It was a soft crackle of static. It came from the kitchen. Slowly I turned my head. My eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway. The static cleared. And a voice came from the old Panasonic radio. A voice that was crisp, measured, and perfectly enunciate. A professional broadcast voice. And we conclude our broadcast here. The voice was mine. The voice from the radio was not a broadcast. It was clean. It was close. Like a man speaking into a microphone in the next room. My voice. My knees were screaming from the hardwood floor. Beneath my mother's head, the dark patch on the wood was a little wider now. A slick, dark red. Her breathing was a faint flutter against the side of my neck. I stayed there, knelt in the hallway, listening to the impossible sound echo in my head. And we conclude our broadcast here. A click from the kitchen. The radio went silent. The world rushed back in. The hum of the refrigerator. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. A sound I hadn't noticed in years. The tiny, ragged sound of my mother's breath. I had to move. I couldn't stay here. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, but it lit up. I thumbed the screen, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial. 911. The voice on the other end was calm, a woman. I told her my address. I told her my mother fell. I told her she hit her head. I did not tell her I pushed her. I did not tell her a dead man's cough had been coming from her throat. I did not tell her my own voice had just spoken from a dead radio. The woman told me an ambulance was on its way. She told me to stay on the line. I set the phone on the floor next to me, on speaker. I watched my mother's chest rise and fall. It was barely perceptible. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. 2 paramedics. They were efficient. They asked questions. I gave them answers. Simple ones. She tripped on the rug. I think so, yes. I don't know. They put a brace on her neck. They lifted her onto a gurney. I watched them carry her out the front door. I followed them onto the porch. Red and blue lights painted silent, circling patterns on the house across the street. One of them, a man with a tired face, turned to me. "Are you riding with her?" I looked at the open doors of the ambulance, at the small shape under the white blanket. "No," I said. My voice sounded thin. "My sister, Sarah. She'll meet her there. I need to call her." He nodded. He didn't seem to care. He shut the doors. The ambulance pulled away from the curb, the siren silent. It turned the corner and was gone. The red and blue lights vanished. The house was quiet again. I went back inside and closed the door. The spot on the hallway floor was already drying. A dark, irregular stain. I called Sarah. "Alex, what's wrong? It's past midnight." "It's Mom," I said. "She fell. An ambulance just took her to St. Mary's." A sudden intake of breath on the other end. "Oh God, is she?" "She's alive," I cut in. "She hit her head. They said, I don't know what they said. You need to go there. I can't." "You can't? What do you mean you can't?" "Alex, what happened?" Her voice was sharp, rising with alarm. "I can't leave the house." "What are you talking about?" "Alex, you're not making sense. Are you okay? You sound—" "I'm fine," I said. The lie was a piece of glass in my mouth. "Just go to the hospital. Call me when you know something." "Alex, wait." A pause. "You know, with Dad, and now this, the stress can do things to you." "Maybe you should." "I have to go, Sarah." I ended the call. I couldn't listen to her tell me I was breaking. I knew I wasn't. This was something else. I needed to clean. The thought was a command. I found the bucket and mop in the laundry room closet. I filled the bucket with hot water and pine cleaner. The chemical smell was sharp and real. I scrubbed the spot in the hallway. I scrubbed until the stain was gone, until the wood was pale and damp. I kept scrubbing. Then I moved to the living room. Dusting. Wiping down surfaces. Trying to restore some kind of order. My order. I picked up a framed photo of my parents on their wedding day. I wiped the glass. I set it down. I moved to the large, ornate mirror hanging over the fireplace. It was filmed with a thin layer of dust. I saw my reflection. A stranger with wide eyes and a pale face. There was a smudge on the glass. A fingerprint. Right at eye level. Just one. I let out a short, tired breath. Probably mine, from when Sarah and I had struggled to hang the heavy thing a few years back. I went to the kitchen, got the blue bottle of glass cleaner and a roll of paper towels. I sprayed the mirror. The blue liquid ran down my reflection's face like tears. I wiped the print away. The glass was clean. Perfect. I went back to the kitchen, emptied the dirty water from the bucket and rinsed it out. The house was quiet. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the drip of the faucet. A slow, steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. After what felt like an hour, I walked back into the living room. My eyes went straight to the mirror. The fingerprint was back. It was in the exact same spot. I walked closer. It wasn't a smudge this time. It was sharp, clear, etched in the thin film of dust that had already begun to resettle. I leaned in, my nose almost touching the cold glass. The pattern was wrong. The whorls and ridges were too symmetrical. Too perfect. They didn't loop and arch like a human print. They spiraled inward, like a tiny galaxy, a vortex on the glass. It wasn't a human fingerprint. Okay. I didn't say it out loud. The thought was a block of ice in my gut. I will catch you. I did not wipe it away. I backed up slowly. I pulled out my phone. The cracked screen made it hard to focus, but I managed. I took a picture of the print on the mirror. The flash went off, illuminating it in stark detail for a fraction of a second. Then I went to my bedroom. In a drawer, under a pile of old chargers and cables, was the small nanny cam I'd bought when I was worried about Dad falling while I was out. A little black cube. I set it on the mantelpiece tucked behind a porcelain shepherdess. The lens had a clear, unobstructed view of the mirror. I synced it to the app on my phone. The live feed appeared on the cracked screen. The living room. The fireplace. The mirror. And on the mirror the tiny spiral of the fingerprint. I went back to the kitchen. I sat at the table, my eyes locked on my phone. The live feed was crisp. Nothing moved. Just the empty room. My heart was a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I watched. And I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The only movement was the slow crawl of the second hand on the clock in the living room, visible in the feed. My eyes started to burn from staring at the screen. I was about to look away to rub them when it happened. The image on my phone dissolved into a screen of digital snow. A burst of static. Just for a second. Less than a second. A single, violent flicker. Then the image returned. Clear. Stable. The fingerprint was gone. Fuck. The word was a whisper. I fumbled with the app, my fingers clumsy. I swiped back, to the saved recording. I scrubbed backward, frame by frame. There was the image of the print. Then the next frame. Static. A wall of black and white noise. The next frame. The image was back. The glass clean. The event itself, the moment of removal, was lost in that single, instantaneous burst of interference. It was there, and then it was gone. It had hidden in the noise. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. AirDrop. Unknown device would like to share a photo. My blood ran cold. I was alone in the house. There were no other devices. My thumb trembled over the screen. Accept. Decline. My mind screamed no, but my thumb moved on its own. It tapped. Accept. An image loaded onto my screen. It was a close-up, high-resolution photograph of a thumb pressing against a dark surface. My thumb. I recognized the small, pale scar near the knuckle. The shape of the nail. It was my thumbprint. Clear. Perfect. And beneath the photo, typed in a sterile, white sans serif font, was a single line of text. Imperfect copy. Updating. It wasn't just in the house. It was on my phone. It was watching me watch it. It was learning. Replicating. The word updating pulsed behind my eyes. It wasn't just replacing things in the house. It was practicing. And the photo on the screen was its source material. It was practicing to be me. I looked down at my own hands on the kitchen table. Suddenly, they didn't look like my hands. The skin seemed too smooth, the webbing between the fingers too uniform. The scar on my thumb. Was it always that faint? The feeling was overwhelming. A wave of physical revulsion. These are not my hands. I was being invaded. Not my house. Me. A sound from above. A soft, scraping sound. A creak. The attic. My breath hitched. It was up there. It was playing. I pushed myself up from the table. My legs felt weak. I looked around the kitchen, my gaze landing on the knife block next to the stove. I pulled out the largest one. A chef's knife. The blade was 8 inches long, cold and heavy. The weight was a small, inadequate comfort. I moved out of the kitchen, into the hallway. My bare feet were silent on the wood floor. The pull-down cord for the attic stairs was right there, just past the spot where my mother had fallen. I reached up and pulled. The folding wooden staircase descended with a groan of old springs and a puff of dust. The scraping sound from above stopped. It knew I was coming. Knife held tight in my fist, I started to climb. Each step creaked. The air grew thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. I pushed the trapdoor open with my free hand and pulled myself up into the darkness. I fumbled for the light switch just inside the opening. A single, bare bulb flickered on, casting a weak yellow light across a landscape of forgotten things. Cardboard boxes. Old furniture draped in white sheets. A child's tricycle. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny insects. And on the floor, they were everywhere. Hundreds of them. The strange, spiraling fingerprint, drawn in the thick layer of gray dust. Some were crude, lopsided. Others more refined. They formed a path. A carpet of tiny, alien galaxies, leading from the center of the room into a far, dark corner, behind a stack of old suitcases. I raised the knife. I took a step, then another, following the trail. My flashlight app was still on, and I held the phone out, its bright white beam cutting through the gloom. The path of prints stopped at the corner. I aimed the light into the darkness. Something was there, coiled in the shadows. It was my sister's doll, an old porcelain doll named Annabelle she'd left behind years ago. It sat propped against the wall, its faded dress gray with dust, its painted eyes staring blankly, but something was moving. Its left hand held out slightly. The smooth porcelain surface was not smooth. It was rippling, shifting, like liquid clay. The 5 porcelain fingers were twitching, elongating, flattening, trying to shape themselves into something else. As I watched in horror, the surface bubbled and a perfect tiny fingernail began to form at the tip of the pointer finger. It was trying to build a human hand. A scream tore from my throat. It wasn't a word, just a sound, raw and animal. I lunged forward, blind with a rage that was pure terror. I brought the knife down. Again and again. The porcelain didn't shatter. It gave way with a sickening wet crunch, like old cartilage. I stabbed the twitching, forming hand. I stabbed the doll's placid face, the blade sinking deep into the material. I kept stabbing until my arm burned and my breath came in ragged sobs. Finally, I stopped. The doll was a wreck of cracked, punctured material. The hand had stopped moving. It was just a mangled lump of white. I scrambled backwards, my back hitting a stack of boxes. I sat on the dusty floor, gasping for air, the knife loose in my grip. I lifted my phone, the light from its beam shaking wildly. I swept it across the attic, trying to calm my breathing. My light fell on the tricycle. On its small, red, metal seat was a perfect print. Not the spiral, a human print. I crawled closer. The light moved across other objects. An old wooden crate full of books. The dusty surfaces were covered in them. Prints. Thousands of practice attempts. Smudged, distorted, partial prints. The entire attic was a workshop. A training ground. Then my light found a deflated leather football, tucked inside the crate. It was dark and cracked with age. On its surface, stark and clear in the white beam of the phone, was a single, perfect thumbprint. The whorls, the arch, the tiny bifurcation of a ridgeline. I didn't need to check the picture on my phone. I knew it instantly. The scar near the knuckle was there, clear as a signature. It was mine. The copy was no longer imperfect. The update was complete. The hospital had sent her home. Post-fall confusion, the discharge papers said. A mild concussion. They gave her a clean bill of health and a prescription for painkillers I never filled. It had only been 2 days since the attic, since the doll, since the perfect copy of my thumbprint on the deflated football. 2 days of her sitting in that bed, just as she had been before. Quiet. Lost. And 2 days of me moving through the house like a ghost, waiting for the next edit in reality. I stood by her bedside. The small orange plastic bottle of her actual medication was in my palm. The 2 pills rattled inside. I shook them out into my hand, my movement slow, deliberate. My eyes were on my own thumb, the pale little scar near the knuckle. It looked the same. It had looked the same for the last 48 hours, no matter how many times I checked. My mother sat propped against the pillows, her gaze fixed on the window, on the gray afternoon sky. She hadn't looked at me. She hadn't spoken. I picked up the glass of water from the nightstand. "Mom," I said. My voice was low, a dry rasp. "Time for your meds." No response. Her breathing was even. A machine. I looked from her placid profile to the blue bottle of cleaner I'd left on her dresser, the one I used on the mirror. Everything was just as I had left it. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been replaced. The waiting was the worst part. The silence was a held breath. "I'm going crazy, Mom," I whispered, not really to her, just to the room, to the dust motes in the air. Or, "I'm already there, I really think I am." Her head turned. It wasn't slow and confused like usual. It was a single, fluid motion. Her eyes, which had been clouded and distant for months, were suddenly sharp. Clear. They locked onto mine. A current passed through me. A jolt of something I hadn't felt in a year. She spoke. Her voice was not the high, frayed thing I was used to. It was level. Measured. Each word was a perfectly formed stone dropped into the quiet of the room. "You're not crazy," she said. "But you are being replaced." The air left my lungs. The pills in my hand felt slick with sweat. For a full second the terror receded, washed away by a tidal wave of impossible hope. She was back. The fall, the shock. It had shaken something loose. It had brought her back to me. I had a witness. An ally. I moved to the edge of the bed and sat down, the mattress dipping under my weight. I put the pills and the glass on the nightstand. Mom? My voice cracked. You're back? You remember? I reached for her hand where it rested on the white comforter. Her skin was cool. Mom, you see it too, don't you? I rushed the words out, a torrent held back for too long. The things that change. The coffee mug yesterday, it was blue. I know it was. Today it's green. The photo of you and Dad in the hall. The frame is different. It's wood now, it was silver. You see it, right? She nodded. Just once. A small, economical movement, but her eyes never left my face. They were dark. Watching. The clarity in them was not the warmth of recognition. It was something else, something cold and observant. It has been here for a long time, she said, her voice the same flat monotone. Since your father grew weak, it likes things that are empty. The hope inside me curdled. It shriveled up and died, leaving a pit in my stomach colder than before. This wasn't lucidity. This wasn't my mother coming back. This was something new. Something worse than the confused woman who stared at windows. What do you mean? I asked. My hand was still holding hers. What do you mean, empty? A smile touched her lips. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. It did not reach her eyes. It was a simple muscular contraction, a clinical demonstration of a human expression. My mind, she said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming almost conversational. A perfect space, so much room, it filled me. Now it needs a new host, a stronger one. Her eyes flicked down to my hand, then back to my face. Like you. Her fingers tightened around my hand. The strength was impossible. It was not the frail grip of an old woman. It was a vice. Bone-grinding pressure. My own fingers felt brittle, about to snap. I tried to pull back, but her grip was iron. A gasp escaped my throat, a wet, choking sound. That's when I heard it. A sound from across the room. A soft, rustling flutter. I twisted my head, my arm straining against her grip. On the small bookshelf near the door, my collection of medical textbooks, the ones on neurology, on geriatrics, on dementia, they were flipping open. Pages turned on their own, a dry, papery whisper in the silent room. One after another, they opened and settled. The Guide to Degenerative Brain Disorders, Cellular Pathology, Anomalous Memory Formation. They lay open, displaying diagrams of neurons, chapters on tissue replacement, paragraphs about synaptic decay. The trap closed. This wasn't my mother. This was a finished product, a thing wearing her body like a suit. The emptiness had been filled. And it was holding me. It was holding me for whatever came next. Panic gave me strength. I lunged backward, putting my full weight into it. I yanked my hand free with a sound of tearing skin. I scrambled away from the bed, stumbling, catching myself on the doorframe. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wild, trapped bird. I slammed the bedroom door shut. My fingers fumbled with the old brass lock. I twisted it. A heavy click echoed in the hallway. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the wood. I waited for the yelling, the banging, the shattering of a lamp. Nothing. Silence from the other side. A deep, listening silence. It was worse than any noise. My eyes were wide, staring at the closed door, at the lock. My hand, the one she had grabbed, throbbed with a deep, aching pain. Red welts were already rising on my skin, impressions of her fingers. Then, a voice. It came from the door, muffled by the wood, but perfectly clear. It was my voice. I'm so tired, it said. The exact pitch, the exact weary inflection I used when talking to myself after a long day. It was the voice of my own exhaustion, weaponized against me. Just so goddamn tired, my voice continued from inside the room. Why me? Why always me? It was reciting the words I'd muttered under my breath in the kitchen last night while scrubbing a pan. The curses I'd whispered in the shower. The private, bitter complaints of a man at his breaking point, now being played back to me by a monster wearing my mother's face. The mimicry was flawless. It wasn't just copying my voice, it had copied my despair. I can't do this anymore, it said, a perfect echo of my own hopelessness. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. It pressed in on me, I held my breath, listening, my body rigid, every nerve screamed. What now? What new hell was it devising in there? I slid down the wall, my legs no longer holding me. I sat on the floor, my ear pressed against the cold wood of the door. I had to know. I heard a sound. Faint. Muffled. A tiny, hitching sob. It was my mother's voice. The real one. The weak, confused, frayed voice I had known for the past year. "Alex?" she whimpered from inside. "Alex, honey, help me. It's so dark in here, please." I froze. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know which voice was the performance. I didn't know if the thing inside was a monster playing a new, crueler game, or if my real mother was trapped in the darkness of her own mind, a prisoner in her own skull, begging for a rescue I could never give her. The lock on the door felt like the pin in a grenade, and my hand was resting right on top of it. I stayed on the floor, my back against the door. For how long, I don't know. The whimpering from inside had stopped. There was no sound, no movement, just the pressure of the wood against my spine, and the throbbing in my hand where she had grabbed me. The lock was a cold lump of brass under my fingers. A trigger. I didn't pull it. I couldn't. Eventually, the pins and needles in my legs became unbearable. I pushed myself up, using the wall for support. My body felt like a machine run on bad fuel, shaking and uncertain. Each step down the hallway was a conscious effort. The house was a tomb. The air was thick and still. I went into the small bathroom off the hall. I didn't turn on the light. The gray dawn filtering through the frosted window was enough. I leaned over the sink, my hands gripping the cold porcelain edges. My knuckles were white. In the mirror, a stranger looked back. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dark, sunk into his skull. He hadn't slept. He looked like he hadn't slept in years. I turned on the cold tap. The gush of water was loud in the quiet. I cupped my hands and splashed water on my face. Again. And again. The shock of the cold was a small, sharp anchor in the storm inside my head. Water dripped from my hair, from my chin. I had to get her out. I had to get us out of here. That was the only thought that felt solid. Pack a bag. Get in the car. Drive. Don't stop. My fingers, slick with water, traced the line of my jaw. My thumb brushed against my chin. A reflexive, thoughtless gesture. And then it stopped. There was a scar on my chin. Or, there was supposed to be. A small, white, crescent-shaped line from when I was 9. A bicycle, a patch of gravel, a lot of blood. It was a permanent part of my face. I could feel it in the dark. I could trace its raised, slightly rough texture with my fingernail, but my thumb slid over smooth skin. I leaned closer to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. I angled my head to catch the weak light. The skin on my chin was unbroken. Perfect. The scar was gone. No, it was the light. It was my eyes. It had to be. I was exhausted, running on nothing but fear. My mind was playing tricks, layering one more impossible thing on top of all the others. A hallucination. That's what it was. A symptom of a mind breaking down. I pushed the thought away. It was a piece of glass too sharp to hold. I splashed more water on my face, rougher this time, trying to scrub the idea away. I had to focus. The car, the bag, my passport. I stumbled out of the bathroom and into my own bedroom. It was exactly as I had left it. Clothes on a chair. A book face down on the nightstand. I pulled my worn duffel bag from the closet and threw it on the bed. I went to my desk, yanking open the top drawer. It was a mess of old papers, pens, loose change. My passport had to be in here. My hand dove into the clutter. My fingers brushed against something sharp, a sliver of pain. I pulled my hand back. A deep, clean scratch ran across the back of my hand, from the knuckle of my index finger towards my wrist. A bead of blood welled up. I remembered what it was from, the picture frame. When I had dropped it yesterday, the glass had shattered. I must have cut myself cleaning it up. I hadn't even noticed. I stared at the cut. The blood was a vivid, shocking red against my pale skin. A part of my brain, the part that was still a caregiver, noted that I should clean it. But I couldn't move. I just watched it. And then I saw it. It wasn't a sudden magical healing. It was slower, more methodical. The edges of the wound seemed to soften. The angry red line began to shrink, not like a scab forming, but like a film being run in reverse. The skin on either side was knitting itself together, the cells pulling the gap closed with a steady, relentless efficiency. It was a biological process on fast forward. I watched for a full minute as the cut became a thin red line, then a pinkish mark, and then nothing. The skin was smooth, unblemished. Not even a trace of the injury remained. The fear that had been a cold knot in my stomach now spread like ice through my veins. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't about the mug or the photo frame or the books. It had moved past the inanimate. The horror wasn't just in the room down the hall, it was in me. I tore at the collar of my shirt, my breath coming in short, harsh gasps. I looked down at my arms, my chest, my legs, searching for what? For another change, another correction? A mole that had moved, a birthmark that had vanished. Everything looked the same, but the feeling was overwhelming. This body, my body, was no longer my own property. I was a tenant, and the landlord was starting renovations. I was being edited. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the bottle of sleeping pills on my nightstand. The prescription was old, from a time when my mother's nightly wanderings had destroyed my sleep schedule. I grabbed the bottle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely twist the cap. If it was changing me, if my own biology was being hijacked, maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could just turn it off. Force it into shutdown, sleep. If I could just sleep, the process might stop. I shook 4, 5, 6 of the little blue pills into my palm. I didn't get water. I threw them into the back of my throat and swallowed them dry, the chalky taste coating my tongue. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, waiting for the familiar heavy-limbed drowsiness to descend. I waited for the fog. It never came. Instead, a new sensation spread through me. It started in my chest and radiated outwards. It wasn't warmth. It was a clean, humming energy. The exhaustion that had weighed me down for days simply evaporated. The shaking in my hands stopped. My thoughts, which had been a frantic, chaotic scramble, became sharp, clear. My body felt efficient, optimized. I stood up and walked back to the bathroom. I moved with a new economy of motion. No wasted steps. I flicked on the light. The sudden brightness didn't make me flinch. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was still me, but a better version. The dark circles under my eyes were gone. My skin had a healthy color. And on my chin, where the faint memory of a scar had been moments ago, there was nothing. The skin was as smooth and perfect as a statue's. My phone buzzed on the desk in the bedroom. The sound cut through the air. I walked back, picked it up. A message from an unknown number. Just a few words in stark, block letters. Bug fixed. System optimizing. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. I looked at my hands. My own hands. I raised my right hand and tried to dig the nails of my left hand into its back. I tried to recreate the scratch. To leave a mark. A sign that I was still in control. My fingernails scraped against the skin. There was no purchase. It was like trying to scratch glass. I pushed harder, with all my strength. My nails bent backwards, a flash of pain shooting up my fingers, but my skin remained pristine. Perfect. Unyielding. I had lost the right to damage my own body. Panic, pure and absolute, took hold. My eyes scanned the room, looking for a weapon. Not for defense. For self-desecration. To prove I was still here. My gaze fell on the top of the dresser. My father's old grooming kit. A leather case. Inside, a badger hair brush, a puck of soap, and a silver safety razor, and a small, paper-wrapped pack of fresh razor blades. I tore the kit open, my fingers fumbling with the clasp. I grabbed one of the little white packages, ripped it open with my teeth. A single, double-edged razor blade fell into my palm. Cold. Thin. Perfect. This was it. A final, desperate act of territorial marking. This is my face. My scar. I will put it back. I walked to the mirror, my reflection watching me with an unnerving calm. I held the blade between my thumb and forefinger. I pressed the edge against my chin, right where the scar used to be. I closed my eyes, grit my teeth, and pulled. Hard. I felt the resistance. A strange, dragging pressure, like pulling a knife through dense rubber. There was no sharp bite of steel into flesh. There was no pain. Just that. unyielding friction. My eyes snapped open. I was still looking in the mirror. The blade was still pressed to my chin, but the metal itself was warped. The razor-thin cutting edge, the one I had just swiped across my skin, was bent, twisted back on itself like a piece of tinfoil. My skin was untouched. Not a line. Not a drop of blood. A sob escaped my throat, a dry, broken sound. The razor blade fell from my numb fingers, spinning as it hit the porcelain sink with a faint tink. It was over. I had lost. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out completely. I landed hard on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, curling into a ball. The last of my strength was gone. The last of my hope. Tears I didn't know I had left streamed down my face, mixing with the water I'd splashed there earlier, puddling on the floor. I lay there, shaking, my weeping the only sound in the house. Through the shimmering film of my tears, I looked at my own reflection in the small puddle of water on the white tiles. The face staring back was mine. It was twisted and distorted by the uneven surface. But it wasn't crying. Its features were composed. And as I watched, its lips curved upwards into a slow, slight smile. It was not a smile of happiness. It was a smile of quiet, profound satisfaction. The smile of a job well done. I remained on the cold tile of the bathroom floor. The puddle of water and tears had mostly evaporated, leaving a faint, cloudy film. My reflection was gone. I pushed myself up. My body moved with a quiet purpose that didn't feel like my own. There was no ache in my joints, no protest from my muscles. I was a well-oiled machine. In the bedroom, I found a black permanent marker on the desk. Its chemical scent was sharp in the still air. I went back to the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me was composed, healthy. His skin was flawless. I uncapped the marker. The tip was hard against my chin. I started to draw. I tried to recreate the crescent shape of my scar. The line was clumsy, too thick. The ink bled slightly into the pores of my skin. It looked like a child's scribble. I held my left hand against the side of my face to steady my right. My fingers were a firm brace. Through my peripheral vision, I was aware of my left wrist, of the small, deep red mole that sat just above the bone. It had been there my entire life, a familiar landmark on the map of my own skin. I paid it no mind. My focus was on the ugly black line I was drawing on my chin. This was me. This mark, not the perfect skin underneath. I didn't need to sleep. I didn't feel hunger. But thirst was a ghost, a habit my body still remembered. I left the marker on the sink counter and walked to the kitchen. The house was without sound, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft padding of my bare feet on the linoleum. I took a glass from the cabinet. It was cool and smooth in my hand. I filled it from the tap, the rush of water, a sudden violence in the quiet. I lifted the glass to my mouth. My eyes drifted down to my left wrist as it rose into my line of sight. The skin was clean, unbroken. The glass paused an inch from my lips. Water sloshed over the rim, cold against my fingers. The red mole was gone. It wasn't there. I had seen it. Not 5 minutes ago. I had seen it. It was there. A frantic energy shot through me, a current of pure ice. My head snapped to the right. I looked at my other wrist, the one holding the glass. And there it was. It sat in the exact same spot, a perfect mirror image of its old position, a crimson dot above the bone of my right wrist. It hadn't just moved. It had been relocated, transposed with a surgeon's precision. It was a correction, an error in symmetry that had been flagged and resolved. It was tidying up. It was making sure everything was aligned, balanced, before the final launch. The countdown I hadn't known I was in had just lost its final numbers. Time was no longer a line. It was a point. And I was on it. I dropped the glass. It didn't shatter. My grip simply failed. It hit the floor with a dull thud, rolling under the table. Water spread across the linoleum in a dark, amoebic shape. Proof. The thought was a splinter in my mind. I needed proof. A record. Something to scream into the void that this was happening. I ran back to the bedroom, my movements swift and certain. I grabbed my phone from the floor where it had fallen. The screen was dark. I pressed the side button. It lit up, bright and clear. I swiped, my thumb finding the camera icon without thought. The lens opened, showing my face. I was pale, my eyes wide. The black marker on my chin was a crude, pathetic slash. I looked insane. I hit the record button. My name is... I stopped. My name. What was my name? The name felt like a borrowed coat. My name is Andrew, I said, the words strange on my tongue. Something is happening to me. It's not in my head. I lifted my right wrist to the camera. This mole. This was on my left wrist. My entire life it was on my left wrist. I talked. The words tumbled out. A jumbled inventory of the last few days. The coffee mug that was a different blue. The photograph that changed. The books on the shelf rearranging themselves into alphabetical order overnight. I talked about my scar, the one on my chin. I pointed at the black line. It was here. It's gone. It erased it. I showed the camera the back of my right hand, the skin smooth and unmarked. I cut myself here yesterday, a deep cut. It healed. In a minute, it just closed. My voice was a monotone, a statement of facts. I was gesturing with my right hand, the one with the mole, trying to explain the unexplainable to a silent, glass eye. And I saw it, on the screen. The red mole was moving. It was not a jump. It was a slow, steady glide. It slid across the surface of my skin, unhurried, like a drop of blood under a microscope. It left no wake, no trail. The skin behind it was exactly as it had been. The skin before it made no resistance. It was just relocating. It moved a few millimeters down, toward my hand, an impossibly smooth, silent journey. My words died in my throat. I stopped breathing. But I kept the phone steady. I kept it pointed at my wrist. The camera was the only thing in the world. This was it. This was the proof. Undeniable. A biological process that did not exist. The mole stopped. I lowered the phone. I looked at the recording. The tiny screen showed a wild-eyed man talking nonsense, then falling silent as he stared at his own arm. I could see the tiny red dot. But it was just a dot. On a screen. Who would I send this to? The police? A doctor? They would see a man in the middle of a breakdown. A man drawing on his own face with a marker. They would see what they were trained to see. And they would be wrong. So terribly wrong. It was useless. The thought was not a surrender. It was a simple, cold calculation. The game was being played on a level one couldn't reach. The evidence of my own erasure was being written in a language no one else could read. With a numb finger, I deleted the video. Click. The sound came from the hallway. A soft mechanical sound. The lock on my mother's bedroom door. Being turned. From the inside, my body moved before my mind could process the sound. It was the pure, mindless reaction of prey. Flight. I spun around, my eyes scanning the room for an exit, a hiding place. The window was a 2-story drop. The door to the hallway was a death sentence. To my right was the door to the small storage closet. I lunged for it. I pulled the door open, slipped inside, and pulled it shut behind me, leaving only a hairline crack. My back pressed against the door. Darkness enveloped me, smelling of dust and old cardboard. I held my breath. My heart was not hammering in my chest. It was beating with a calm, steady rhythm. An engine waiting for instructions. I heard the footsteps. Soft, shuffling steps. Not the sound of a monster. The sound of my mother. She walked down the hall and into my bedroom. I pressed my eye to the crack in the door. She stood in the middle of the room. It was her. But the slackness in her face, the confused fog in her eyes, was gone. Her movements were deliberate. She was not looking for me. I had the sudden, chilling certainty that she knew exactly where I was. She walked over to the old wooden table against the wall. In her hands, she carried a set of clothes. My clothes. My favorite pair of jeans and a dark blue sweater. They were perfectly folded. Ironed. The creases were sharp. She laid them gently on the table. She smoothed out a wrinkle on the sleeve of the sweater, with a slow, careful gesture. Then she turned her head, not towards the closet, but towards the empty space in the center of the room. Her expression was neutral. Her voice, when she spoke, was her voice, but it was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was the sound of a speaker playing a recording. "Put on your new clothes, son," she said. "It's almost done." Then she turned and walked out of the room. I listened to her soft footsteps go down the stairs. I heard the front door open, and then click shut. I stayed in the closet. The darkness felt like a tomb, but a safe one. I didn't know how much time passed. An hour. Maybe more. Eventually, the instinct to remain hidden faded, replaced by a dull compulsion. I pushed the door open and stepped back into my room. The folded clothes were still on the table. A final outfit. A uniform for my own replacement. I looked down at my right arm. The arm I had filmed. The crimson mole had settled into its new position, slightly closer to my hand. It looked like it belonged there, and then I saw the other change. Next to it, a new mark had appeared. It was smaller, no bigger than a pinprick, and it was a perfect, deep black. It was a detail that had never existed on my body before. Not a flaw being corrected. Not a misplaced feature being realigned. It was an addition. An improvement. A new line of code in the final version of the software. I knelt on the floor of my room. The wood was cold against my knees. The folded clothes sat on the table, a still life painting of a person I was about to become. I didn't look at them. I looked at the wall. I needed an anchor, something solid, something mine. My first day of school. I clutched at the thought. The memory was a lifeline. I could feel the hard plastic handle of my lunchbox, the one with the cartoon rocket ship on it. I could smell the chalk dust in the classroom air and the woody scent of pencil shavings. My teacher, Mrs. Gable. She had a kind face and a silver pin shaped like an owl on her collar. I remembered a boy named Kevin crying because he missed his mother. I remembered not crying. I was a big boy. My father had told me so. The memory was sharp. It was real. I held it. Then, something else slid into place beside it. A park. Sunlight coming through the leaves of unfamiliar trees, dappling the ground. I was on a swing, pushing myself higher with my legs. My mother, my real mother, her face young and clear, was pushing me. Around the swing set there were flower beds. They were filled with flowers I had never seen before, with thick, waxy petals of a deep, impossible purple. I knew the name of the park. Westwood Park. I knew the feel of the sun on my skin. I knew the joy of swinging so high my stomach lifted. I shook my head. The motion was small, barely a twitch. No, that isn't mine. Westwood Park was on the other side of town. We never went there. My park was Elm Street Park, with its rusty slide and the oak tree I tried to climb 100 times. The purple flowers were a fiction. But the memory of them felt as solid as the memory of Mrs. Gable's silver pin. It was a file, copied and pasted into my brain. I tried to delete it, to push it away, but it stayed, shimmering at the edge of my thoughts. I needed proof. Physical proof. I crawled over to the closet, where my old things were stored. At the bottom of a cardboard box, under old tax returns and a high school yearbook, was the photo album. The cover was worn, a faded maroon vinyl. It smelled of dust and time. I pulled it out and sat with it on the floor, my back against the bed frame. I turned the pages. The plastic film over the photos was yellowed and crinkled. There I was. A baby in a tub. A toddler smearing cake on his face. Then I found it. The picture from my 5th birthday. I was standing in the backyard, holding a new toy. It was a die-cast car, a bright, fire-engine red convertible. I remembered that car. I loved that car. I ran it along every surface in the house until the paint chipped off the fenders. I stared at the picture. My fingers traced the outline of the red car. Proof. And then the other memories surfaced. Not a gentle slide, but a jolt. Me, on the floor of a toy store, crying. A full-blown tantrum. I was screaming for a blue car. Not red. I hated red. I wanted the blue one. My mother was trying to calm me down, her face tight with embarrassment. We left the store without a car that day. I remembered the injustice of it. The hot feeling of tears on my face. The two memories existed side by side. Me, happy with a red car. Me, screaming because I didn't get a blue one. I looked at the photograph. The boy in the picture was smiling. He was holding a red car. That was the fact. The paper and the chemicals said so. But the memory of the tantrum, the raw feeling of wanting that blue car, was just as strong. It wasn't just erasing things. It was adding things. It was building a new foundation under a house that was already standing. Something was being written over me. A new draft of a life. The boy holding the red car was a stranger. The boy crying for the blue car was a stranger. Which one was the ghost? My breath came in short, sharp bursts. Who am I? The question was a whisper in the silent room. There was no answer. There was no one left to ask. My eyes scanned the room, a desperate search for something real. Something untouched. They landed on my desk. On top of a stack of books sat a notebook. A simple, black, spiral-bound notebook. I had never seen it before. I pushed myself to my feet. My legs felt unsteady. I walked to the desk. The notebook looked new. I reached out and touched the cover. It was smooth, cool plastic. There were no marks on it, no dust. I opened it. The first page was filled with handwriting. My handwriting. I knew my own script. The way I sloped my T's. The way I never closed the loop on my G's. It was mine. Unmistakable. But the words were not. October 12th. Rainy day. Stayed in and helped Mom sort through the attic. It's hard for her. Found my old baseball glove. Funny, I don't even remember liking baseball. I flipped the page. October 15th. Called Mike today. It's been a while. We talked about the old days, back at Northwood High. He's doing well. A kid on the way. We promised to get a beer next time he's in town. I didn't know anyone named Mike. I went to Lincoln High. I never played baseball. I flipped through the pages, faster and faster. A life scrolled past. A different childhood. A different adolescence. A trip to a lake I'd never heard of. A friendship with a boy I'd never met. A pet dog named Buster that never existed. It was a complete life, detailed and mundane. It was a forgery of a soul. I reached the last written page. The ink was different. Darker. Sharper. It looked fresh. October 21st. Today, I finally convinced Mom to throw out Dad's old things. The boxes have been in the garage for years. It's not healthy for her to keep them. They just make her sad. It's time for a fresh start. For both of us. A reason. A perfectly crafted excuse for why the house might change. Why old relics of my father might vanish. It wasn't an erasure. It was a spring cleaning. A therapeutic act performed by a loving son. It was the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. This was the final preparation. The groundwork for a complete and total takeover. My identity wasn't just being stolen. It was being replaced with a new, improved model, complete with a custom-built past. A cold certainty washed over me. This was it, the final stage. I gripped the notebook, the smooth plastic cover dug into my palm. I turned from the desk and walked out of the bedroom. My steps were heavy on the floorboards. I was not sneaking. I was not hiding. There was no point. The woman who looked like my mother was in the living room, reading a magazine. Light from the window fell across her face. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of mild surprise. It was a perfect imitation. I held up the notebook. What is this? My voice was low, a strained chord of sound. She smiled. It was my mother's smile. The shape was right. The lines around her eyes were right. But there was nothing behind it. It was a mask. It's your diary, honey. You started it last week, remember? You said you wanted to get your thoughts down. The words hit me like a physical blow. The simple, logical, patient explanation. The tone of someone speaking to a confused child. It was a chisel, aimed directly at the last cracks in my sanity. What did you do? The words tore from my throat. A raw, ragged sound. Her smile faltered. A look of concern. A perfect, painted look of concern. Replaced it. Andrew, are you all right? You've been writing in it, every night. Right there, at the desk. I stared at her. At the thing wearing my mother's face. It was telling me I was the one who was wrong. That my own memory was the liar. A guttural noise escaped my lips. I looked down at the diary in my hands. The history of a stranger. My replacement. I ripped the cover off. The spiral binding screeched in protest. Andrew, stop! The woman's voice was sharp with alarm. I started tearing out the pages. 2, 3 at a time. The paper was crisp. It made a satisfying, violent sound. I tore them into smaller and smaller pieces. The story of Mike and Buster in Northwood High fluttered to the floor around my feet like dead leaves. I was destroying the evidence. I was killing the man they were trying to build. I tore and tore, my breath catching in my chest, a frantic energy burning through my arms. I reached the last page. The one written in fresh ink. The one about my father's things. As my fingers closed around it, ready to rip it from the binding, a flash hit me. Not a memory. A full-body experience. I was sitting at the desk. The lamp was on, casting a warm circle of light. The black notebook was open in front of me. A pen was in my hand. I was writing. I could feel the smooth glide of the nib on the paper. I could feel a sense of purpose, of clarity. A feeling of doing the right thing. I wrote the words about my father's things, about a fresh start. And as I finished the last sentence, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. A weight was lifted. It was a good feeling. A happy feeling. The memory ended. I was standing in the living room. Torn paper covered the rug. My hands were empty. They hung at my sides, twitching. The woman was watching me, her face a mask of fear and confusion. I looked at the pieces of the diary on the floor. I looked at my empty hands. The terror of the replacement was gone. The anger was gone. They were replaced by a new, more horrifying feeling. A complete void. I remembered tearing the diary. I remembered writing in it. I didn't know which memory was mine. The torn paper lay around me on the rug. Small white scraps. The history of a man who never was. My hands were empty. They felt light. The woman, the thing wearing my mother's face, stood near the archway to the kitchen, her arms crossed. Her expression was no longer one of alarm. It was something else. A kind of patient observation, like a doctor waiting for a seizure to pass. The fight drained out of me. It left through the soles of my feet, a current into the floorboards. I did not move. I did not speak. My mind was a flat surface, a still lake after a storm. The contradictory memories, writing the words, tearing the pages, no longer fought each other. They simply were. Two facts occupying the same space. I was the boy who loved the red car. I was the boy who screamed for the blue one. The paradox no longer caused a spark. The wires had burned out. I sat. I waited. For what, I didn't know. The next correction. The next rewrite. Then I heard it. A sound from upstairs. From my bedroom. Footsteps. They were my footsteps. I knew their weight, the specific way the third floorboard from the door creaked under a man of my exact build. A heavy, thoughtful tread. The sound of me, pacing. The sound of me, thinking. But I was not upstairs. I was here, on the living room floor, surrounded by the debris of a fabricated life. I did not feel fear. The capacity for it seemed to have been exhausted. All that remained was a dull curiosity, a need to see the mechanism. I looked at the woman. She didn't react to the sound. Her eyes were fixed on me. She was watching me, not the source of the noise. Slowly I pushed myself up. My ankles popped. My knees ached. The movements were clumsy, disconnected. I felt like a puppet whose strings had gone slack. I took a step, then another, toward the staircase. Each step was an effort of will. The woman watched me go. She did not try to stop me. The stairs were cold under my bare feet. I took them one at a time, my hand trailing along the wall for balance. The footsteps from my room continued. They stopped, then started again. The sound of a closet door sliding open on its track. A soft, familiar scraping. I reached the top of the landing. The hall was dark. The only light came from the living room below, casting a weak yellow rectangle on the floor. My bedroom door was ajar, a black slit in the wall. I walked toward it. My own heart was a low, steady drum in my ears. I was not sneaking. There was no one to hide from. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I reached the door and pushed it open another few inches. The gap was wide enough to see inside. He was there. He stood in front of my open closet. It was me. Every detail was correct. The shape of my back, the slight slump in my shoulders I always tried to correct. The dark, unruly hair that always curled over my right ear. He was wearing my gray sweatpants and an old t-shirt. He was examining the shirts hanging in the closet, his head tilted in a way I recognized from my own reflection in the mirror. He pushed a hanger aside. The plastic made a soft shush against the metal rod. He was humming. A low, tuneless sound. But I knew the tune. It was a wordless melody my father used to hum while he worked in the garage. A song I hadn't thought of in a decade. The memory of it felt both intimately mine and completely alien coming from this other man's throat. This was it. The final product. The finished model. Ready for deployment. The diary had been the software update. This was the new hardware. The battle was over. It had been over before I even knew it had begun. I was not a participant. I was just the leftover material. The rough draft. About to be discarded. A strange sense of calm settled in my chest. There was nothing left to do. No one to convince. No reality to cling to. I was just an observer, watching my own replacement get dressed for the first day of the rest of my life. He selected a dark blue button-down shirt. My favorite one. He took it off the hanger and laid it on the bed. Then he turned. For a moment, he didn't look at me. He looked at the full-length mirror attached to the closet door. He looked at my reflection. He ran a hand through his hair. He smiled. It was my smile, the one I used for photographs, the one that never quite reached my eyes. His gaze in the mirror was confident, clear. He looked at his reflection and spoke, his voice a perfect replica of my own, but without the weariness I heard in it every day. Everything is ready. Then he moved. He walked out of the bedroom, straight for the doorway where I stood. I braced myself. For a collision. For a fight. For some final, violent acknowledgement. He walked right past me. His shoulder did not brush mine. The air did not stir as he passed. It was as if I was not there. Not a pane of glass, not a wisp of smoke, but nothing. A void in the shape of a man. He didn't swerve. He didn't flinch. His eyes looked straight ahead, down the hall, toward the stairs. He went down the steps. I heard his feet on the wood. I turned and watched him go. He walked into the living room. The woman, his mother, looked up from her spot near the archway. Her face broke into a real warm smile, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. "Andrew," she said. Her voice was full of relief. The copy went to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the fabric of her blouse indented under his touch. It was a solid, physical connection. "I'm here, Mom," he said. His voice was gentle, reassuring. "I'm never leaving you again." She reached up and put her hand over his. "Oh, honey, I was so worried." They stood there, a perfect picture of a mother and son reconnecting after a difficult moment. I was 10 feet away, in the upstairs hallway, and I had ceased to exist. I tried to scream. The impulse was primal, a final, desperate clawing for relevance. I opened my mouth, my throat tightened, my lungs pushed out air. I felt the muscles in my neck strain with the effort. No sound came out. Not a whisper. Not a croak. My vocal cords vibrated in the vacuum. The silent scream was a purely internal event, a pressure building in my skull with no release. I stumbled back into my bedroom. My room. The blue shirt was still on the bed. I needed to touch something, to prove I was still here. I reached out for the desk, for the wooden corner I had stubbed my toe on 1,000 times. My hand went through it. There was no tingle, no cold spot, no sensation at all. It was like putting my hand through a projection of light. My eyes saw my fingers sink into the solid wood, the grain of the oak visible through my skin. But my nerves reported nothing. I slammed my hand down again, a frantic, desperate motion. It passed through the desk, through the stack of books, and through the floor. I felt nothing but the air on my arm. The world had revoked my access. I was no longer a registered user. I looked at my hands, they were still there. The lines on my palms, the scar on my right knuckle from a childhood fall. But there was a change. A subtle shift in their substance. I held my left hand up in front of the window. The gray light of the afternoon shone through it. I could see the faint outline of the neighbor's roof through my palm, wavering as if seen through old glass. I was being erased. My body was becoming a suggestion, a memory the world was in the process of forgetting. I walked, or floated, back to the top of the stairs. I looked down. The copy and the woman were on the sofa now. The television was on, a low murmur of a game show. He had his arm around her. She was leaning her head on his shoulder. They were laughing at something the host said. A perfect family. A happy home. And I, the original file, the corrupted data, was being purged. Slowly. Methodically. I wasn't being killed. I was being unwritten. The process was not violent. It was quiet. It was efficient. I did not fight it. How could I? There was nothing to push against. I sat on the top step, my legs passing through the wood so it felt like I was hovering an inch above it. I watched them. I watched the life that was supposed to be mine, now occupied by a better version. A version that didn't have fractured memories. A version that could make his mother smile. The transparency was spreading. My arms were shimmering, my chest a translucent pane through which I could see the patterned wallpaper of the hallway. The sounds from the living room were becoming distant, muffled, as if I were listening from underwater. The world was fading out, or I was fading out of it. The sensation was not pain. It was a slow, inexorable subtraction. Just before the last of my vision dissolved, I saw the copy reach for his pocket. He pulled out my phone. The screen lit up his face. A call was coming in. The contact name was displayed in stark white letters. My sister. The copy smiled. A serene, calming smile. He swiped to answer the call. He put the phone to my ear. His voice was the last thing I heard, clear and steady as the world dissolved into gray. Hey, I'm here. I'm sorry if I made you worry. Everything's okay now. The gray was gone. The feeling of being erased, of thinning into nothing, was replaced by a sharp, sudden cold. It shot up through the soles of my feet. I gasped, a real gasp, pulling in air that tasted of damp earth and car exhaust. I was outside. I stood on the asphalt of my street, directly in front of my own house. The sky was the pale, milky white of pre-dawn. A single street lamp cast a cone of orange light onto the wet pavement. I was in my pajamas, the thin cotton doing nothing to stop the morning chill. I could feel every jagged little stone of the road pressing into my bare skin. It was real. The sensation was absolute. I turned and looked at the house. The lights were off. A silhouette against the brightening sky. It looked exactly as it always had. The small crack in the porch step. The azalea bushes my mother pruned every spring. It was just a house. A container of wood and brick. The horror within it felt a million miles away. I was out. I was free. I don't know why or how. The process of deletion had stopped, or it had spat me out. The corrupted data file ejected from the system. It didn't matter. I was here. I was solid. I flexed my fingers, watching the knuckles turn white. I stomped my foot, feeling the jarring shock travel up my leg. A laugh escaped my throat. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a raw, ragged burst of pressure, like a boiler valve finally giving way. The sound echoed in the quiet street. It grew louder, a wild, heaving sound that scraped my throat raw. I was alive. I was outside. I had survived. I started to walk, then broke into a stumbling run. I didn't know where I was going. It didn't matter. Away. Just away from that house. Away from the woman with my mother's face and the man with mine. Each step on the cold, rough asphalt was a confirmation. I am real. This hurts. I am real. The pain was a blessing. I ran past the edge of my lawn, past the mailbox, toward the corner of the block. That's when I saw Mr. Henderson's car. It was parked at the curb where he always left it. A silver Honda Civic, nearly a decade old, kept in meticulous condition. A familiar, comforting piece of the neighborhood's mundane furniture. I slowed my run to a walk, my breathing still coming in ragged bursts. I looked at the car as I passed. The logo on the front grille was upside down. I stopped. I stood dead still in the middle of the road. My heart, which had been hammering with relief, gave a single, painful thump against my ribs and then seemed to fall silent. I stared at the car. It was the silver H in its chrome oval frame. But the top bar was wider than the bottom. The whole emblem was inverted. It was a small thing. A tiny, insignificant detail. A factory error, maybe. A prank by some neighborhood kid. There were 100 rational explanations. My mind scrambled for them, offering them up like flimsy shields. But I knew, the same way I knew the diary was wrong, the same way I knew the man in my bedroom wasn't me. It was the quiet, confident signature of the thing that had taken my life. It was a correction. My eyes snapped away from the car. I couldn't look at it anymore. I needed an anchor, something normal, something undeniably, unchangeably correct. I looked around frantically, my head whipping back and forth. The street, the houses, the trees, everything looked right. The same sleepy suburban street I had known my entire life. I was seeing things. The stress, the trauma. It had finally broken my mind. That had to be it. I was imagining it. It was the only explanation that didn't lead to a cliff. My gaze fell on the Green Street sign at the corner. Oak Street. I'd lived on Oak Street for 28 years. OAK. I knew its shape. I knew the specific way the paint was peeling on the top right corner. I looked at it, desperate for its familiar comfort. The sign read, Oak, S-T-R-E-T-E. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. No, it wasn't possible. It was a typo, a mistake made by the City Works Department, a laughable, stupid error. But the peeling paint in the top right corner was there. The sign was old. It had been there for years. It had always been Oak Street. I had read it 1,000 times, 10,000 times. My feet carried me forward, stumbling, until I was standing right underneath it. Street. I reached up, my fingers shaking, and touched the cold metal. The green paint was cool and smooth under my fingertips. The white letters were slightly raised. They were solid. They were real. The world tilted. The sense of freedom I had felt only minutes before curdled into a new kind of dread. One much larger and more profound than what I had felt in the house. The house was a cage. This was something else. I began to walk again, but my pace was different. It was the slow, deliberate shuffle of a man inspecting evidence at a crime scene. A very large, very quiet crime scene. My eyes darted everywhere, scanning, searching not for comfort, but for more errors, for more proof. I found it everywhere. The fire hydrant at the corner. It had always been a rusty red. Now it was a bright, almost cheerful yellow. The stop sign. The octagon was perfect, the color a deep red, but the letters STOP were in a font I'd never seen before, thinner, with small, sharp serifs like tiny fangs. I turned the corner onto Main Street. The bakery, Tuscan Loaf, now read Tuscan Loaf. The A was missing. The neon sign in the window of the 24-hour diner, which should have blinked open, now simply glowed with a steady, unwavering light. I looked at the people, the few early morning dog walkers and commuters. A man in a business suit walked with a gait that was just slightly too rigid, his arms not swinging quite enough. A woman waiting for a bus stood perfectly still, her head tilted at an angle that looked unnatural, uncomfortable. She didn't blink. It wasn't just the house. It was never just the house. The thing, the entity, the process, the cosmic error correction, wasn't a home invasion. It was a software update for the universe. It was patching reality, and my personal torment, my erasure, hadn't been an attack. It had been a symptom. A single pixel changing color on a screen the size of the sky. I wasn't the victim. I was just the first one to notice the patch notes. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. The sun was beginning to properly rise, casting long, clean-edged shadows across the ground. The sky was a flawless, cloudless blue. But the clouds I had seen just a moment ago. I looked up. There were a few wisps now, high in the atmosphere. They weren't soft. They had corners, faint but distinct geometric angles, like shards of broken glass. There was nowhere to run. The realization didn't come with a scream. It didn't come with panic. It landed with a quiet, heavy certainty in the pit of my stomach. The fight was over because there had never been a fight. You can't fight a flood. You can't punch the tide. You can't reason with a software update. My role was finished. I was the obsolete version, an anomaly, a ghost left behind by a system that had moved on. I stood there and watched. I watched a bus drive by. Its color was wrong, a shade of green that didn't seem to exist in nature. I watched the traffic light change from red to green, without an amber light in between. I watched the cracks in the pavement. They weren't random. They formed patterns, repeating tessellations if you looked long enough. The world hadn't been invaded. It had been replaced, overwritten with a new version, cleaner, more efficient, but with a few minor bugs in the code, a few typos, a few inverted logos, little imperfections in the pursuit of a greater perfection. The horror wasn't in the flaws. The horror was in the intent, the relentless, mindless drive to make everything better, smoother, more correct. My frantic energy was gone. My legs felt heavy. My mind was quiet. The questions had been answered. A woman walked toward me, coming from the other direction. She was holding a leash, and at the end of it was a dog. She was older, with silver hair and a kind face. She wore a bright pink jogging suit. She smiled as she approached. It was a perfect smile. Her teeth were perfectly white, perfectly even. Her eyes met mine. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was melodious, each word pronounced with a crisp, clean precision, like a sound file playing. "A perfect day to start over, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was looking at the dog. It was some kind of terrier mix, with wiry brown fur. But its eyes, they were a deep, liquid black. And in the center of each eye, the pupil was not a slit or a circle. It was a cross. A perfect, black cross. The dog looked up at me, its head cocked, its cross-shaped pupils unblinking. It didn't make a sound. The woman's smile never faltered. She tugged gently on the leash and continued past me. As she walked by, my gaze drifted to the brick wall of the building behind her. A long, jagged crack which I hadn't noticed before suddenly began to move. The edges of the brick shimmered, flowed like liquid, and sealed themselves shut. In seconds, the crack was gone, leaving behind a smooth, uninterrupted surface of brick and mortar. Perfect. I stood alone on the sidewalk, a relic in a world that had been freshly reinstalled. I was a bug the system had missed. I lowered my head and looked at my hands. They were solid. They were my hands. For now. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe I would just fade away for good. Maybe I was doomed to walk these corrected streets forever, a lone witness to the silent, immaculate apocalypse. There was no one to tell. There was nothing to be done. I took a breath. The air was clean and tasteless. Perfect.